Hello, everyone. Today, Belligerent Christian and I, linked to his channel in the description below, are going to
What's up?
discuss evolution and what he sees as problems within it. His two major contentions are that we've never seen one kind of organism change into another, and that the evidence for intelligent design, he says, is convincing. So, would you like to speak to one of those contentions?
Pick one.
Let's go with the first one. That one kind of organism changing into another. Would you like to speak on that one?
Well, I heard it put that at one of these evolution conferences, the guy got up and he showed a butterfly. This is why before the live stream I mentioned the butterfly. Is that what he showed as proof for evolution was that a butterfly was introduced to I think it was the Hawaiian Islands, but they were introduced to some islands, and the banana peels were too thick for the butterfly to get through. So the butterfly eventually developed a proboscis that could penetrate the banana peel and actually get to the banana. And he showed that as proof of evolution. I say that that is not proof of evolution because that's not addressing the problem. The problem that we say is not that animals, well, the claim is not that animals don't change. It's that they don't change from one animal into a completely different animal. So the butterfly, yeah, sure, maybe its proboscis changes, maybe its color changes, maybe the length of its legs, its body dimensions change, but it doesn't change into something other than a butterfly. And that's what I say.
I suppose. So what you're saying is there are a variation within these organisms or within these populations of organisms?
I would need to do a little more homework to say that, but yeah, sure, we'll go with that for now.
Okay, I've heard that claim made by intelligent design proponents before. You've heard of David Berlinski?
Yes.
Yeah, he's often the one I hear saying that. Well, not really anymore, but in videos I've seen of him in his younger days, still alive. But in his younger days, that was one of the things he would say. He would talk about that we see on the,
David
the Galapagos Islands.
The alive.
Yeah, Galapagos Islands. He said, "Oh yeah, well the finches, they get longer or shorter beaks, or they adapt the dry season or the wet season, but they don't become a different animal. They always stay finches."
Yeah, or at the very least, they always stay birds.
Right. So my contention with that argument has always been had enough time to observe these organisms in these environments to make any conclusions about the limits of variation that exist within their populations.
Okay.
Yeah, he talked about. He said in one video I saw where I think I actually quoted that video in one of my older ones, where he says, well, these finches, they may become larger or smaller depending on the season, but they don't ever become a different kind of animal because of the limits of their variation. But the problem is there aren't any studies, as far as I'm aware, on the limits of genetic variation within populations. I mean, populations definitely have there. You have to have a certain set of genes to live, and a certain set of characteristics to live. For example, if you can't achieve homeostasis in your environment, if you can't find food or water, or if you don't have space to live, then you die off. But but I think the concept, for me at least, the concept of there being limits of genetic variation, it is definitely contrary to evolutionary thinking, because in evolutionary biology, we talk about, over billions of years, there have been these gradual, but ultimately these large scale changes in organisms, and so the concept of limited variation kind of seems contrary to that, wouldn't you say?
I don't follow you, but if I could identify something you've touched on,
Okay.
is that there is a spectrum of variation. There is an absolute zero on that spectrum, on the number of variations that you can have. But what you just pointed out is that that's not the realistic zero, where that there is something farther from that, where where there is a base minimum number of genes for self-replication, for producing proteins and such, that is necessary for the life of any given organism.
Well, for
Do you
these
follow? Did I
explain
that well?
Yes, to an extent. For these animals, with their morphology, physiology, they have to have a certain number of genes to maintain homeostasis, to find food, to reproduce, etc.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's what I mean. Where there's a bare minimum there for variation. Yes.
Yeah, for them, it's a certain number of genes, but for an African elephant or for a human, it's going to be a different set of genes that that separate minimum, I guess, or that different minimum would exist also in us. We'd have to have a minimum set of genes that would allow us to do that. But I suppose
If I could,
yes.
so there's a minimum, there's an absolute minimum, and then there's a minimum for any given organism to keep being that organism. And what I would like to point out, just for thought's own sake, is to take you to the extreme other end of the spectrum, where hypothetically the number of changes could be infinite, where you can have an infinite amount of genes or DNA within a cell. Now, I don't think that that's quite true. I think there is a limit to what to the morphological changes that you can have in an organism. For example, I don't think that so I don't think that we can be that we're somehow going to evolve to be spacefaring creatures, like just by our biological selves. So I think there is a limit, a maximum limit on the on how much we can develop biologically.
Right.
So
Yeah. I think
all I'd like to point out is that there's the minimum of 0, where they're where we can do any tiny cell has enough to replicate. That's not quite true. Nor is it true that a cell can evolve to do anything. Like, there is an actual spectrum there, and what we're arguing is around.
Yes, I would agree that. I think it was Richard Dawkins pointed out in The Blind Watchmaker. He said there's a huge chasm of animals that will never come into existence because they can't nature with their morphology the way it is.
Right, yeah.
And so, I mean, yeah, I'm not saying that there isn't a range of bodily plans that we can get based on the constraints of physics and morphology. I'm just saying that,
and environment too.
Yes, and the environment, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that what Berlinski seems to be implying is that we can't, is that they're in, the finches, for example, are in a box. They will always be these little birds, even though we don't necessarily know if that's true. Of course, well, in Berlinski's case, for example.
Well, if I understand what you mean by box, right, and that's actually my position exactly, is that we were talking about before about kinds and that Hebrew word for it. Like that's exactly what I say, that there is a box for the butterfly, that a butterfly can evolve to become something other than a butterfly. There is a box of butterflyness that its genome can't get out of. That's what I believe.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, that is what you would call platonic thinking. It's basically, it's in other words, it's called essentialism. You ever heard of essentialism?
Yes and no. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that
okay,
the genome for a butterfly, let's say, yes, there is room for variation in its genome, for example, with the proboscis. But if that genome changes too much, it's not that the butterfly changes into something else. It's that the butterfly ceases to be. A butterfly can't actually live if its genome changes too much.
I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, if one generation or one offspring in a generation has too many mutations in it, mutations, I suppose, then it would die off. Wouldn't be able to procreate or maintain homeostasis or what have you. But if you look at something like, if you go back to the Cambrian, for instance, the Cambrian period, you're about the Middle Cambrian, this group of walking worms, their scientific name is lobopodians, but these walking worms had characteristics of worms and also of arthropods. Okay, and so scientists think today that these guys were ancestral to both and the myriad arthropods, even though the walking worms looked a lot more like the velvet worms than they did like arthropods. And so it just seems when we find this, they seem to hint at the notion that these organisms can go through much evolution over time and diversify it into a wide array of forms. So for me, it's also their genetics. And like I said earlier, I've never seen a paper where it's described that, or where an organism is described and said, and the scientists say that this organism has limits of variation. For example, if it's a cat or what have you, then then the cat ancestry can't ever not be what we would today call a cat. I don't think there are any papers out there on it because I don't think anyone's quantified what makes a cat or a dog or anything like that.
And this goes to what you were saying just a few seconds ago. I don't know if this was during the live stream or before when we were setting up, but where you said that we haven't had time to study the genome to figure that out. Is that right? Do you remember the point in the conversation I'm talking about?
No, I don't think I said we haven't had time to study the genome. I don't think.
Well, oh, that's what it was. You said that we haven't had time to study the to actually see, for example, a dog become something other than a dog.
Yes, that's what I said. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and how and we just finished mapping the human genome not very long ago, and now we're comparing it to other creatures. So we haven't actually been studying it that long to figure out what the truth is about that.
Well,
About where the limits are on genetic variation. If you catch
yeah,
what I mean. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, well, we have done quite a few comparisons over the years with our genome to other organisms, like chimps, orangutans, gorillas, cats, dogs, etc. There's been a lot of comparing genomes of different organisms. And that's all throughout zoology. I may not have the entire organism's genome sequenced, but you can compare sequences of the genome to see the similarities among organisms and gauge who's most closely related to who. Like caecilians, I think, which are a group of kind of snake-like amphibians. It was thought that, or the scientists wondering, where do these guys fit in on the amphibian tree? And they figured out, based on pairing sequences of their genome against the other amphibians, that they deserve their own branch, while the salamanders are sister clades to each other. But genetics is a really great piece of evidence. Is as Francis Collins said, is the best piece of evidence evolution happening. I put that on my pointing to common ancestry, which I put out there just a few days ago. I think it was maybe a week. You and Peter talked a little bit about genetics in your conversation. For example, at one point, you said you didn't think that genetics was a good argument. Is that right?
Right.
And why do you think
so
that?
let's talk about genetics.
Okay. So why do you think genetics isn't a good argument?
Tell me about what is it? Genetic drift, I think the word is.
Okay.
Tell me about genetic drift, mutation rate, things like that, and how that produces a new creature.
Okay, well, genetic drift genetic drift is when a gene is not being naturally selected, but it spreads through the population by, quote, random the random spreading of this gene. It's mostly for stuff that isn't, I think, vital to survival. For example, human wisdom teeth. The gene for losing human wisdom teeth is spreading throughout our population. More and more people are being born without wisdom teeth, even though it's not critical to our survival to not have wisdom teeth anymore. So genetic drift is just kind of the random genes that get spread through the population. If they're not selected for or against, they're not harmful or whatever.
Right.
And you also said mutation rates?
Yeah.
Mutation rate is generally considered to be the approximate number of mutations that an organism or that an offspring has per generation. For humans, each human has, I think it's 1 in every 100 billion nucleotides is mutated. I think that's what it is. It's like 1 times 10 to the 8th. Or sorry, 1 times 10 to the negative 8th. It's like 1 in every 100 billion.
Yeah, that would be quite a bit of mutation going on.
Yeah, 1 times 10 to the negative 8th. So 1 in every 100 billion nucleotides is mutated. And so yeah.
Okay, now is that higher than other organisms or lower?
It depends. I would imagine for most,
in general, on average, like what's the average mutation rate?
I don't think there is one. Because you have viruses.
And I can see that, yeah.
You have viruses which operate close to the mutation threshold, which is where they replicate a lot, and they have a lot of mutations, which pushes them really close to extinction, more or less. They operate very close to the mutation threshold, but I would think for most primates, it's probably about the same. I mean, I think for most larger animals, it's probably a fairly small mutation rate because you probably have to have a high degree of copying fidelity to exist, you know. But I really
Copying fidelity. What is that?
like low mutation rate. The you'd have to have a lot of your nucleotides be copied correctly in during replication.
Okay,
and
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So, goodness. So, what about those?
Well, I ran a few numbers last night. It was something like for humans to exist as they do now with something like 3 billion base pairs. Does that sound right?
Approximately, yeah.
Okay, and life has existed on Earth, let's say about 3.5 billion years. So let's round it and say 3 billion years, just so we have round numbers. So that's about one base pair change in a positive direction, not necessarily immediately beneficial, but in a positive direction every year from then till now.
How do you know?
What's that? Oh, this is just the math.
Okay. I'm not really understanding the calculations. Also, I think it'd be more fair to say that life was closer to 4 billion years ago than 3 billion.
Closer to 4 billion? Okay. All right. So we need, what would the number be on that then? One every 1.33 years? You would need a new base pair in a positive direction every 1.3 years, right?
You mean wait, so you're saying that they would add a base pair to their genome about every 1.33 years leading up to us?
Right. Or not necessarily to us, to any organism with 3 billion base pairs.
The problem with that calculation is that mutation. For one thing, is that mutation rates aren't static. The other problem is,
I know
that
yeah.
Okay. The other problem is that it's not linear. I mean, it's have genome duplications, where you can mutate some part of that genome that was duplicated, causing a new function or structure to arise. I don't know. What's the point of the calculation, though?
Right. So the point of the calculation is if we need a new base pair every 1.3 years to get from absolute zero, where you say it's 4 billion years ago, sure, to now, if you need a new base pair every 1.33 whatever years, is that the number? Is that the amount of genetic change that we see in organisms today, or in general?
Well, I also want to point out that we wouldn't start at zero. Depending on which hypothesis, I guess you would take for. Okay, fine. We'll just start with zero. Well, honestly, we don't know what we would assume life to look like, given what we see today. We can't really make predictions on what life would look like. If we were to go back, if you and I were to go back to 4 billion years ago on Earth, and we see the first RNA or whatever, we couldn't possibly make any predictions on what that RNA is going to look like in the future. we have zero idea how that would turn out billions of years from then. We just can't judge mutations, natural selection, etc. We can't really judge that.
Okay, so how far back can we go to say this organism is the oldest organism we know of and it had this many base pairs? Do we have that?
For fossils, no. One of the RNA world
We can't
no,
get DNA from fossils.
no DNA
I remember
breaks
seeing
down
some.
after no DNA breaks down after a few thousand years.
Okay, because I saw I was surprised to see it. I saw that someone was trying to extract DNA from fossil. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
They could try it with I think they try it in like Russia with mammoths because they're trying to restart the mammoth population for some
Yeah, I saw that.
unknown reason.
That's gonna be cool.
Yeah, I mean it'll be neat, but I just think why?
Because it's cool. Because we can. Because it'd be nice. It'd be nice to bring back an extinct species.
I mean, I had that conversation with gonna go for it. He said, wouldn't that be cool? And I said, well, interesting. And that's probably a route we should travel down to do research, but we'd also have to be very careful about the ecological impacts of that sort of research. Cautious with regard to that, I think.
Yes, yeah. Well, this is going off in a different direction now. We're talking about ecology, not biology and evolution. But I don't think we have that much to be fearful of. If, for example, evolution is true and we do introduce a new species to our ecosystem, it just means the ecosystem is going to have to adapt to a mammoth herd somewhere. And I don't think that's very much to be afraid of.
Take bees, for instance. If we were to kill off all the bees in the United States for whatever reason, the crops in the United States would fail. There'd be no way for the. I mean, it's not just the crops; it'd be the flowers in the United
and we
States.
create a mass extinction
necessary. I mean, yeah, it would kill. That would kill very many plants, which would in turn kill herbivores, which would then kill off the carnivores.
But we're assuming that nothing comes in to take their place. That there's going to be absolutely no check to that. And I don't think that's true.
Not really. No, I think eventually that would come in and take that place. But I'm saying that within the next generations or so, it would kill off the plants and then the herbivores and the carnivores. I mean, eventually something else might come.
Well, yeah, but that's the worst case scenario where it's this endemic thing of bees are dead, therefore no flowers can be pollinated. I don't think that's true. There are other species of insect and bird that pollinate flowers. It would just be those flowers that relied on the bees that specifically and only that couldn't pollinate. And if the bees were gone, you would see other species of insect and bird and whatever that would then pollinate those flowers, and their populations would get a slight bump. I would think.
I mean, I agree that the other pollinators would theoretically still be there, and they would still be helping out in the environment, but it wouldn't be at the scale, I don't think, that bees work at. Wasps, for example, they pollinate too accidentally, but they're not. Actually, wait, are they? No, they're not. Wasps aren't hive. Well, yeah, they are. They are the hive minds too, aren't they?
They have very small hives. I don't even know if they're called hives, but
okay,
but yeah, they're communal animals.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the other populations of animals, or the other pollinators, wouldn't have the same effect on the flower population that the bees had. But I mean, eventually, sure. But
okay,
again,
well, I mean, where I'm at, we've had a dramatic loss of the bee population, but I look around even now and I still see flowers everywhere.
Right. I
It's
mean, I
it's not
suppose.
that the loss of bees killed off the flowers. It's something else happened. And I say that the other thing that happened was that other species move in to take the place of the bees. And I think that's what you'll have when mammoths come in. Like sure they'll come in and they may push out other species, but that's not really a bad thing.
To an extent, but we haven't seen no bees looks like either. The bee population has taken a hit, but we still haven't seen what no
Oh,
bees.
I'm sure there's a study out there about that. Like,
Sure, I'm sure there is too.
yeah,
But
yeah. So
we're
okay,
also way off topic from where we
yeah, yeah.
originally were. We were discussing. We were talking about
Genetic drift
genomes.
and mutation rate, and we were trying to do my crude guesstimation. Okay, so what is the oldest animalian that we know of with that we know the base pair count of? Do we know that?
Well, that's kind of a that's that's a little bit of a confusing terminology. Animal, every organism that exists today, organism. We have had just as much time to evolve.
I'm sorry, say that again. You cut out real quick there.
Oh, I'm sorry. So yeah, if I do, just stop me and say, "Hey, man."
Yeah. And you have been. It's just been like this one was at a critical point where I missed something important.
Okay. Okay. Yeah,
so you were
that
saying
happens sometimes. My internet sucks. Okay. What I was saying was that we and sponges, for instance, are both modern animals. We have had just as much time to evolve from our common ancestor with sponges, as sponges have had to evolve from their common ancestor with us. The same with E. coli bacteria. I mean, we think of bacteria as being, the most primitive organisms or whatever, but E. coli bacteria is a modern organism. We have all had the same amount of time. Everything that is living today has had the same amount of time to evolve. And so what would the...
Okay, good, perfect, yeah.
Okay, so what would, for sponges, for example, like what would their... Because they're classified as the most basal animals, I guess is the best term for it. I don't know. I guess I could look it up, I suppose. How many...
Base pairs of sponges.
Let's see.
The study involved 40 million. That's not really what I'm looking for.
It says like 18,000 individual genes. I really don't know. I mean, I can't really...
DNA base pairs of sponges? Come on, Google, don't fail me.
I don't know. I don't really see anything that says the specific number of base pairs that they have.
Grunt.
But
okay, Sponge Genome Project. Let's do it.
Okay. Yeah, let's get on that. Homoscleromorphs first. They're the coolest.
Okay. All right. So here's where I'm trying to go with that. So
okay.
What we'll see is that we'll have a certain number of base pairs for a given organism, right? And so, for example, it would be the example I was using was that we were just using was 1.3 new base pairs every year for humans. Now, my question would then be, is that the rate of change in our base pairs that we see today? So whatever that rate of change in base pairs, does that match our mutation rate and the addition of genetic base pairs every year for us today?
Again, it's not a good calculation to use because the mutation rate in bacteria, in fish and amphibians and humans, we all have different mutation rates, and so we can't really just make a calculation that says, oh, the approximate linear number of base pair additions per generation is going to be like is approximately 1. or so. That I mean, that kind of calculation, because you have things like molecular slowdown, and there are, like I said, there are organisms that operate near the mutation threshold. Well, viruses aren't organisms, but they operate near the mutation threshold. Except we're going to be able to like suppress mutations better than others, which is, I think, and some mutations affect organisms more than others. I mean, it's just
Are there animals? Are there animals with a very, very high mutation rate? Actually, before you answer that, let me ask you just one other thing. Can we agree that DNA? Because this is what I hold. Can we agree that DNA is information?
Depends on what you mean by information.
A code that tells a cell what to make, and then
so you're referring to operate. Protein coding abilities of the genes.
Yes.
Because the DNA holds a lot of stuff like pseudogenes and endogenous retroviruses and things like that really don't do anything. Yeah. So okay, for the protein coding abilities of genes, then sure, I agree. Yes, I would agree.
Okay.
That.
All right. Cool. Well, even what you're talking about, retroviruses and like non-functional genes, like I would say that's information too. But it's junk information. Like, can we agree that it's information?
I'm
not necessarily trying to jump from information to an informer either. That's not the move I want to make.
No, I'm just trying to. I don't know. It's just I would agree. See, the reason that I agree that protein coding genes are information is that they have a job. To think of something that doesn't have a job or doesn't code for anything as information seems a bit bizarre to me.
Okay, so let's just go with code. We can agree that it's a code, right?
The DNA is a code?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a word that we can use for it because I want to say something later. Okay.
Sure.
What were you talking about? What were we talking about before I asked my question?
You're talking about mutation rates in animals, and you said, can we agree that DNA is a code? I didn't write anything.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask. And I think this was exactly what I asked. So do we know of animals today that have a very high mutation rate?
Of animals specifically? Not that I'm aware of. I'm sure there are some animals out there that probably have high mutation rates, but I'm not aware of specifics.
Yeah, see, so this is like kind of the this would kind of be the crux of the argument. If there are no animals that have a high mutation rate, then would it be reasonable to infer that there have not been animals with a high mutation rate for a long time in the past? Meaning there have not been animals meaning that there have not been animals that have been able to add code to their DNA. So you say no, that's not a reasonable conclusion?
No. There are animals with, and we see organisms in general today that have high mutation rates. And so we know that
animals. You say organisms, but I'm talking about animals because animals have existed for how long in the past?
What? How long have animals existed? About 650 million years or so. Biologist. Let's see. I'm trying to look up. Okay. Wait. Actually, here it is. To a first approximation, the germ cell mutation rate in all animals is about the same. It varies depending on the region of the genome, but over the entire genome, the differences average out. The mutation rate is what allows for molecular clock analysis to accurately divergence times between different lineages in the past. Now, the rates are not exactly the same between species. That is why a molecular clock calibrated against the fossil record, but extending to about 55 million years ago, the fossil record contains enough well fossils whose lineage affinities are well established. So essentially, what it's saying is have approximately the same mutation rates.
Okay, so we have the same mutation rate going backwards.
Approximately, yes.
Okay, now with the mutation rate of generally, on average, all animals, is it possible to add that amount of information from the beginning of the Earth and get to where we are now? Is that a mathematical possibility?
Well, for one thing, mathematics is a tricky question, which kind of loses part of it.
I'm not. Well, to be clear,
what I would say is, I would point out that not all nucleotides have a function in gene coding. Not all mutations have a function in gene coding. So,
so that's fine. Means, we're not talking about that. Well, that's not what I'm trying to ask. What I'm trying to ask is, with the amount of information that we have, and the not with the amount of genetic code that we have, is there enough time from the formation of the world to now to add the amount of information that the amount of code that we have?
I don't see any evidence to the contrary. From
but what do we see any evidence for it?
Well, yes, that's why, and that was what it was talking about. We calibrate. That's right. That makes sense. That makes sense, actually, when I think about it. The molecular clock says what the article was talking about. What it's referring to is, you look at the mutations in organisms, and you can estimate the approximate time that organisms diverged based on their genome, based on the mutations that accrue in their genome. And so we can calibrate that against what the fossils show us. For example, we diverged from a common ancestor with chimpanzees about 6 million years ago. When we look at fossils, we see that there are, or sorry, not even looking at fossils. When we look at our genetics, we see that our mutation rates are about the same. And so our differences can be calibrated to about that point, about 6 million years ago. And so, and then we can we can bring in the fossils and say, okay, does this match what we see in the fossil record? And yes, it does.
Times 10 to the minus 9. So
but a lot of times when mathematics are applied to evolution, they're misapplied. A lot of people, I've seen a lot of people do the how many protein combinations would it take to produce full living cell as we know it today. With or how many is necessary to change like proteins, and not just proteins, but also nucleotides, into what we see today from a distant ancestor. Calculations are carried to incorrect conclusions because of incorrect starting premises, and so that's why I get a little bit wary about calculations sometimes when they're applied in arguments to evolution.
Okay, now look, someone who's less charitable would say, okay, but if the math doesn't support you, then your position can't be true. If the numbers don't add up, then you don't have an argument. So what would you say to that?
Hey,
buddy, you're cutting out quite a bit. Jackson?
Yeah.
Jackson, I can't hear you. Testing? Testing 1, 2?
Hello, can you hear me?
Marco.
Polo.
Okay. All right, I can hear you again. All right, so
Okay.
Everything from the end of my question I couldn't hear. So go ahead.
Okay. What I was saying is, what I've seen new genes, new structures appear in nature under the scrutiny of, and they have been it's occurred in nature. In a population in Italy, this family developed a mutation in their apolipoprotein A1 protein, their gene that codes for that, which allows you to break down cholesterol. So this family in Milan, Italy, they have a mutation that allows them to digest the cholesterol than other people. It's just one. We've also seen in the Italian wall lizards that they developed a cecal valve in their gut, which allows them to digest cellulose, whereas the original population cellulose, or at the very least did not focus on. So they developed new to cope with their new diet. And so, I mean, we can talk about the improbability of these types of mutations or types of structures forming.
And we won't.
Yeah,
like I understand what the evolutionists are saying on like improbability. So you're right. We won't go there.
Just saying and that's really the crux of what my problem often is with the mathematics. Math is a great subject. It helps us understand a lot of things. But when we start talking about, it even help us a lot in evolutionary biology. It helps us understand a little frequencies, and you can even apply math in the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium and stuff like that. And math is great. It's just that when we start talking about mutations and you get these pseudo-random mutations which are acted upon by natural selection, probability or improbability of these structures forming or of these mutations occurring. And I think sort of the same thing applies to about how many nucleotides, or how often would new nucleotides have to form to equal what we see today. You can still hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. I would hate to cut out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's not just about mutations. They're not just adding, 1 or 2 or 3 per generation. It's also that the number of mutation nucleotides that they get is also acted upon by natural selection, by genetic drift, and gene flow and things like that.
Okay, but I'm not concerned with natural selection. Natural selection keeps an organism, keeps a body type of a body plan on track to survival. I get that, but what I'm concerned about is the generation of new genetic code.
Okay.
And by the way, about the math not helping, I mean this mutation rate that I'm looking at, 0.5 times 10 to the minus 9th.
Okay.
I mean that's not an abstract number that's just thrown out there that says this number must match. It's rooted in the real world.
No,
it's rooted in our genetic code.
I absolutely under mutation rates, and the mathematics for them is worked out. I absolutely understand that, and I totally get mutation rates are fantastic. They're absolutely used, but I wasn't talking about I wasn't saying that they're bad or anything. I'm just saying that it's hard to talk about.
No. I'm saying you and I both agree that the mutation
Yes.
rate is good, and it's good that we understand that.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Yeah,
Absolutely.
and we also both understand what a year is. So when we try to apply 0.5 times 10 to the minus ninth changes in the base pairs, and then try to go back, say 650 million or 3 billion years to when life first started, and we get different numbers that don't match up with the world we see. This isn't a problem with the math. This is a problem with the theory.
No, I feel like someone would have noticed that by now if that were an inherent problem.
You would think so.
I don't think the issue here is.
Does the word neo-Darwinist mean anything to you?
Yes, I know what it is, but
Okay.
hold on. Well, hold on. Let me pause right there. What your implication is that everyone is that all the scientists who studied the math and actually know theoretical what is it, geneticists or whatever they're called,
Right. Yeah.
and so
I got you.
I know that these guys haven't completely missed the point. They haven't gone, oh man, why didn't we think of that on the mutation rates of organisms? That kind of stuff is. It's not like everyone just.
You're cutting out a little bit again, but
Uh-oh.
Go ahead. I can hear you again. Okay, go ahead.
Reiterate what I said. I just said basically that.
Yeah.
They're not all missing. They can't all be missing the point on this monumental issue.
You would think so. But experience with humans tells us that we can.
You're not going to tell me they're all putting or hiding the numbers, are you?
No, I'm not going to tell you that they're hiding the numbers, but I am going to tell you that for me to be correct, yes, they all have to be false. So, of course, I have to make that assertion at some point.
Well,
at some point, I have to say they're all wrong. Like you shouldn't be surprised about that.
Right, but sticking with mutation rates, actually, I don't even know the answer to this, so let me ask. So I don't assume. Are you one of the young Earth guys or an old Earth guy?
Yes, I am. I happen to be, but yes, I am. But that's not because I've studied like the science or anything. This is because I'm a history guy. I look at the Bible and I take it seriously. And if God says 7 days, I'm more inclined to believe God on a whim. And also because I don't have to accept evolution as true to live my daily life. I do have to accept like something like around Earth, but I don't have to accept that all life started from one or very few base forms to evolve to live my daily life and understand God's word. Does that make sense?
Evolution to live my life either. It's what I do because I've studied the science behind it. I mean, I'm not getting paid based on, at least not yet, on
right.
Understanding the science behind it. But right, the mutation rates. How old do you think the Earth is?
Marco.
Hello?
Marco?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
Did you hear my question?
How old do I think the Earth is?
Yeah. Approximately.
I think it was some theologian, some Bible scholar who put all the numbers together in the Middle Ages, came up with 6,000 years. I've heard other people say 10,000 years. I don't know, but I'm in that range.
Okay, so if we're talking about, do you think that the mutation rates support a young Earth?
No, the mutation rate suggests an Earth that has to be much, much older than it is.
Okay.
And not just the addition, the mutation rate, but the addition of genetic code to anything's given genome. We need a much older Earth than the one science and Big Bang Theory suggest to us.
No, no, I don't think that's true at all. For example, well,
And this is why I'm trying to do the math on it.
but again, you keep coming back to this linear calculation of we should expect this approximately this many nuclear here per.
Well, according to the guy you just cited, it is linear. Hold on. I've got a garbage guy in the background. Okay, but according to the guy you just cited, the mutation rate is linear. Yes? No?
Not for all organisms, no. Not for all time. He's saying for animals today, and yes, probably for about the past 650 million years, let's say, the mutation rate has been about 1 times 10 to the negative eighth. Your calculation is based on since the start of life. Ever since then, we've needed approximately, you said like one base pair for every like 1.3 years.
Yeah, something like that for humans.
Okay, well,
and that's a completely hypothetical number. Yeah, as you pointed out.
Right, but we don't know what the mutation rate prior to animals was. It has probably been
but if we have a range of mutation rates, and even at the best end, the age of the Earth, the suggested age of the Earth, doesn't allow that much time that is needed.
No, I don't know where that number's where you're saying the. I don't really understand where that calculation is coming from. You have to explain that one to me.
What calculation? Which one?
You said the time on Earth for those mutations to happen. Is that what you said?
Right.
Okay. How did you come to that conclusion?
Okay, so what is 0.5 times 10 to the minus 9th? I don't have a calculator with me. What would 0.5 times 10 to the minus 9th times the age of the Earth be? And does it give the amount of genetic code that we actually have today? Actually, that's going to give us a linear number, and you're rejecting the linear calculation. So let's go to there. What would the see if I can get this question right. What would the what would alter the mutation rate one way or another? What could give us a boost?
Any number of factors, I would imagine. Morphology, environment, just a lot of things could change it.
Okay, do we know of anything that alters the mutation rate? Or should I just Google it?
Radiation alters it.
What? No. Predation alters natural selection. Okay.
I know what you mean. I was just being ridiculous. I mean, well, morphology can definitely affect the or can affect your mutation.
How does morphology, like body plans, are we talking about? Or are we talking about something else?
Can be affected. Well, the copying fidelity can be affected based on the organism, what sort of proteins they produce to keep their or to do replication. They use might not have a high degree of copying fidelity, and so it might operate closer to the mutation threshold than other organisms, like which is why I was talking about viruses earlier.
Wait, I'm sorry, I didn't follow. Say again.
If you produce a protein that helps or that aids in, or that does, I suppose, the replication, and it has a low degree of copying fidelity, or at least not a very high degree of copying. Why I mentioned viruses earlier.
I see what you're saying. Okay, go ahead.
Then that's one way in which anatomy and physiology could affect your mutation rate, but also
well, that's not really anatomy per se. That's like the
that's
the anatomy of a cell,
microbiology or physiology,
right.
whatever you want to call it. But
yeah, I get you. Okay,
yeah, but I mean they're also ecological boosts to your mutations. For example, in Chernobyl, a few of the different species of fungi live in the area, like I think it was one of them, became radiotrophic. That is, essentially they convert the radiation into
convert the radiation into what?
Into metabolic energy.
That's some like Fallout type stuff. You play the game Fallout?
No, I'm not. I guess I have a few video games, but let me see. Radiotrophism. Radiotrophism.
Okay. Yeah.
The radiation is in. Yeah, they convert the gamma radiation into chemical energy for growth, essentially.
That's crazy. Okay.
So, that's one way, I guess, in which it could be considered positive. It's a lot better for.
Okay, so high doses of radiation.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess for Wayne to have radiation than it is for a human person to have high doses of radiation.
Right, of course.
Which would cause, I would imagine, low copying fidelity and some major mishaps. But yeah.
Yeah, Hiroshima probably knows a few things about that.
Different ways that the mutation rates can be affected, but it seems from these, but they're also, it seems from what we looked at for animals, that it's approximately linear, that it's about 1 times 10 to the negative 8th for animals 50 million years. But and they might have, and some of them might have been a little bit faster than others. Some of in the past might have been a little bit slower than others. But what's important is not so much the generation of new nucleotides as it is altering the existing genes as time goes on. That's more of the issue, is altering the existing genes rather than just building up nucleotides or base pairs.
Okay, but you do have to generate new genes. You do have to generate new code to get from the base of 0 at 3.5 billion years plus 1 day to now, where we have 3 billion. Just enough.
Right, but that's also where, like I was talking about earlier, like that's where gene duplication comes in. For example, in the Slender Clarkia, which is a flower, one group of Slender Clarkia underwent a genome duplication, and so the pigments, they're these pink flowers. So the pink pigment, was mutated in that duplicated genome, allowing for the flower to develop a larger range of pigments. Now there are some Slender Clarkias that have purple and pink flowers rather than just pink flowers. And if I remember correctly, there's been at least one whole genome duplication in primate history. But that's not really where that's not where all the nucleotides come from. That's just one way in which these protein coding genes are changed over time.
Well, what do you mean? That sounds like exactly where the additional nucleotides would come from.
I mean, it is one place, but it's not the only place, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Also, it's also not the for example. Okay, yeah, I guess you're right. Okay, we'll just go with what I said.
Sure.
Mute me now. Anyways,
are you seeing our comments? Are we getting comments?
Are we getting? No, we're not. I've been watching the live chat. No one's.
Okay.
There were 3 people watching. Now we're up to 2. Then we were at 3 and then 4 and then we went down to 1 and then up to 2 now. But no one's commented anything.
Okay. Well,
hello,
hi,
faithful
guys.
viewers. Comment something. Ask us a question. There. But
check
anyways.
my math.
But anyways, about the. But so that's whole genome duplications are just one place where nucleotides can come from. So, there.
Okay, and so how many genome duplications will we need?
I don't know.
Well, first we would need to get a genome, and that would be.
Yes.
Sorry, this is math brain working again, but.
You'd have to have a genome to start with, but
Yep.
We also don't know what the genome of early organisms look like. We have zero idea.
Right.
We don't know how many genes the first what we would consider living cells had. We don't know how many nucleotides they had. We don't know any of that stuff, and so we really don't have any place to start making calculations until we could figure out where did it start. And we're likely never going to know where it started because that would require essentially being there and taking the samples manually. And so,
well, if our guesstimation gets really good, we can estimate. I imagine we could estimate the conditions of the early Earth, its chemical composition, its temperature ranges, how often it changed, blah blah blah. You would need some very powerful computers to calculate that sort of thing. I imagine we could then try to simulate those conditions and try to create life that way. And if evolution is correct, if abiogenesis is correct, we could see where the first organism came from, what it looked like.
Well, there are multiple
what the first ribosomal strand.
Well, there are multiple hypotheses of abiogenesis. There's the RNA world. There's the clay.
Yeah, and I'm taking us to somewhere else right now. I know, but
I mean, yeah, it's just there are so many different ways life could potentially come into the world, but we don't have a good grasp on really the specifics of it, and so, or the specifics, I should say, of how many nucleotides it would take to make what we would consider an organism.
Well, for our viewers, I actually say no, there isn't. You require God, but okay.
And I'd ask proof. I'd ask for proof of that claim.
Actually, my proof of that claim would be the failure to create a working theory of abiogenesis.
Well, what a theory does is a theory accounts for a set of observations, experiments, and inferences. We can infer, and there are lots of good experiments. I could actually probably link in the description from Jack Zostak's lab, where they do lots of experiments with protocells and whatnot, and these protocells have a sort of rudimentary metabolism where they can metabolize certain structures. We know that all the parts necessary to make living organisms form naturally. Nucleotides form naturally, phospholipids, proteins, carbohydrates.
Hey Jackson, before we get off into abiogenesis,
right. We probably shouldn't go there anyway.
That could be our third talk.
Interesting talks, but well, I guess I did want to ask you about. I guess we pretty much covered that topic, but I did want to ask you. You and Peter were talking about a Greek ape in your first talk. Have you done more research on it?
No, I didn't. I didn't. To my shame.
The ape is known as Greekopithecus, which means Greek ape.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Um, it has only been identified by its teeth, by its lower mandible, and a few little teeth, and based on analyses,
Is that all we wait? How much of that thing do we have?
just the mandible and some teeth.
Okay, so I've got this. This was my problem with Peter talking about transitionary forms, where we only have a partial skeleton, like 30% of the whole thing.
Well, we don't have 30% of it.
Yeah. If we just have the mandible and the teeth, I doubt we have 3% of this thing, and yet we're trying to make sweeping claims about evolutionary history that we can't make. This is totally insufficient evidence.
Well, no, that was the point I was going to make. I was going to say, it's probably not one of our ancestors. I was going to say there's good reason to think that it's not one of our ancestors. The reason is analyses of its enamel, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
The primatologist or anthropologists who are studying the fossil are mostly saying it's probably Organopithecus, which is an ape we discovered way back when, I guess, which is a pongid, essentially. It's a member of the orangutan group.
Yeah.
So they're saying that pongid, just another European pongid, that it's not a hominin, it's not in our lineage, it's just another ape that was out there at the same time.
Gotcha.
Not one of our ancestors. I actually did a video in which I talked about. I've actually done 2 videos now. I put the other one out late last night for some reason. I just get into a habit of, or I've gotten into the habit of putting out YouTube videos in the middle of the night for some reason.
Yeah, that works.
I don't know why I think that's a good idea.
That's probably a healthy habit to have.
I'm just like, oh, I'm not doing anything now. YouTube video. That's not what I do. That's not what I think.
Hey, how old are you?
About to be 20.
About to be 20?
I'm 19.
You got a girlfriend?
Currently, yes.
Okay.
What about you?
Because yes, I do. But I was gonna say, like, I'm listening to a lot of social commentary on the in our modern day and how we're becoming parents older and older, and so our birth rate is going down.
Interesting.
Yeah, okay. And like it would make sense that we are up later and later as we get older, because at your and my time in our life, we're supposed to be raising children evolutionarily or by design, according to me. But it's like you and I are supposed to be having kids, and that takes time, and it takes a large part of the day, late into the night. And not just after we put the kids to bed at around 8 or 9, but we're supposed to be making more kids with our prospective mates and doing that sort of thing. So
yeah, it's also, I mean, you know, it's not very economical for people my age generally to have children.
Well, and this would be a critique on the way we do economics.
I don't know. I mean, I have no problem. I have zero problem with having no children right now. Zero problem with that. I'm good. But
joy. Children are a blessing and a joy, I say.
Oh well, they probably.
Yeah. Okay.
But what I was gonna say was, let's see, it's 2:14 now. Okay. All right. Well, I was gonna say I actually made a video a few days ago, maybe it was a week ago. I mentioned it earlier, actually, pointing to common ancestry. It's actually the video on my home.
Pointing to common ancestry.
It's the video. Yes, the video on my home channel, or my It's the one video that's like up there, it's the advertising one, and so I'm pretty proud of that video. But it's also but so I think that you should take a look at it, because in it I provide.
I probably will.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Pointing
provide
to common ancestry.
Yeah, in it I provide 3 different ways we can look at the evidence that we share common ancestry with all other organisms. The first way I look at that is genetics. I talk about the genetic similarities that we have with other apes, for instance. And then I talk about the morphology. We share morphological characteristics with other organisms. And then I also talk about the fossil record. I talk about how we found these fossils like Australopithecines and that have characteristics of with us, but also have older characteristics that are indicative of quadruped ancestry. And the same goes for other older primates like Sahelanthropus, Orin, Ardipithecus, etc. And so I would say there's quite a bit of good evidence for evolution, and it's corroborated by multiple independent sources.
Okay, so you said there's 3 ways to look at it. Can you
At the very least, yes.
Yeah, and I didn't quite wrap my head around the terms. Can you dumb it down a little bit for me? Make it more. For example, I wouldn't call it when I talk to someone, I wouldn't use a term like Christology without first telling them what Christology means.
Well, I don't know what that means either.
Yeah, see, I would have to say, you look at the Bible through the lens of Christ, with Christ at the center and Christ as the focal point of the Bible. That would be looking at the Bible Christologically.
Okay.
So I would say Christ-centered. So when you say, for example, the first way that you said, looking at it, looking at the genetic, looking at the evidence for evolution genetically. Like, okay, I understand genetically because I understand like DNA and genes. I didn't understand the second 2 ways you said. So can you rephrase those?
I said the second, and it might have been because my internet sucks. I said the second way was morphology. Was the
okay,
study
so
of
morphologically, okay, so like
the anatomy and physiology
seeing
of
the changes
organisms.
in forms. Yeah, okay.
And
then the third way?
The third way was by evaluating fossils that share characteristics with us as well as other clades of organisms or of other animals. And my example was Australopithecines, which have bones indicative of quadrupedal ancestry as well as bipedalism.
That sounds like more morphology to me.
Well, in a way it is. I mean, I guess, studying fossils is studying their anatomy, their skeletal structures. So in a way, I guess it is morphology. I just class it as something different because when I think morphology, I'm thinking of modern organisms, and then of course and then I think fossils on a different tangent, and I'm looking at only extinct animals or organisms. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. If I can help you out, you can talk about taking morphology in 2 different directions, like taking the morphological characteristics we have today and then working backwards and calling that one kind of morphology, and then talking about those other fossils, those old fossils, and saying that they point to something and classifying that as a different way of looking at morphology, and they would both be morphology. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. If that's what you're saying, I don't know if that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying.
All right.
you look at just at the morphology of these extinct organisms as opposed to these modern organisms, and so yeah, that's one way I'd say it. Uh, but yeah, so the point was that there are three different corroborating sources. At the very least, I can mention others, but I'll just stick with these three for how we can view evolution. How three different pieces of evidence that allow us to say we're probably descended from a common ancestry with these other organisms.
Okay.
So, do you think it's convincing that what we see in the fossil record confirms what we see in the genetics of modern organisms?
Confirms in the genetics of modern organisms. Well, the first thing I would say about the fossil record, and this is kind of the thing that I was trying to tell Peter, was that when you look at the fossil record, the fossils themselves are the data, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
as well as the surrounding rocks and whatnot, yes.
Yeah. Now, your worldview, your paradigm, and this is the thing that Peter wouldn't listen to, your worldview is going to determine how you look at that. And the pattern recognition in your brain is going to try to match what you see to the worldview you have. So if you have a very old view of the Earth, you're going to say, okay, these rocks are millions of years old, or rather, more specifically, these fossils are millions and millions of years old. It took us a long time for that fossil to develop into something like me. Whereas if you have a young Earth view like me, you're going to say, oh, here's another strange creature that God created and didn't make it onto Noah's Ark. Okay, the worldview is going to determine how you view the data.
I don't think that's necessarily true. Let's take horses, for example. Horses have teeth for grazing. They have very small incisors. So horses have these molars and very small.
Pretty big to me, but okay.
Or canines, I guess it'd be the canines teeth. They have very small canines.
Okay, I got you.
The incisors are the front teeth, not the incisors. Canines.
Gotcha.
So they have very small canines, and they have a lot of these molars. They have these molars because they eat grass, like teeth that will grind the plant into digestible material, at least to some extent. You look at a jaguar, for instance, on the other hand, not the car, the cat, and what you see.
But I like the car.
What you see is that they have these big, sharp teeth for tearing off flesh. And so when you look at a fossil of an animal like a T-Rex, you see these big teeth. You see these big, sharp teeth. And we look at organisms today, and we see that if you have sharp teeth, you eat meat. And you look at something else extinct that we never got to see, like a brontosaurus or a triceratops, and they have a lot of these teeth for grinding, then we would say, okay, they were herbivores. These guys were herbivores, was a carnivore. That's not really affected by our worldview. That's affected by the data that we can gather from the real world.
Right, but the reason our worldview doesn't really have much to say, doesn't play a whole lot to do with that, is that that inference is very, very closely tied to the teeth. I mean, the inference of what an animal eats to what equipment it has to eat is very close. For two, what's the word? Like, it's the reason evolution is so hotly contested is because we have. What's up? Go for it.
No, I was just saying. No, you keep going.
Okay. Now I'm stumbling over my second point.
You're saying the reason evolution is so hotly contested?
Yeah, is because it's making very sweeping claims about a world that we don't actually know a whole lot about. Like
Well,
we have the data of these body plans, but we don't have the data that says these things are linked necessarily.
well, I would actually say we do. We look at it. Our closest relatives as humans, as a species, are the chimps. We share about 98.5% similarity, depending on your source. With
I just read somewhere that our closest ancestor is actually the gorilla by some other.
no, it's
Yeah, okay.
no. That was
Yeah,
actually
I thought it was a chimps too, and then I read gorilla, so I'm like,
there was a, believe it or not, I think it was it National Geographic, I think a few years ago, put out an article that said the
no idea.
orangutan is our closest cousin, and I just thought, seriously,
I could see someone saying that for whatever reason.
I just thought, really, what? But
Well, oh wait, what that actually might be is this very old, very racist point of view that says that
you're talking about like racism.
pretty
I
much
think
that
I think I know what you're talking
white
about.
people arose from chimpanzees, black people arose from gorillas, and then Asian people arose from orangutans. Something really stupid like that.
Yeah, I think that's like Victorian era thinking or whatever.
Right. Yeah. That may be where this idea that we're closely related to orangutans is coming from.
Um, but the point that I was trying to make is we know we're closely related to chimps, not because we just kind of vaguely look like them, but we share over 98% of our DNA sequence says some similar sequences with them, and we share pretty much the same amount of endogenous retroviruses. We share the same broken pseudogenes like gulo, which is why we can't synthesize citrate in our bodies when we have to eat oranges and lemons and whatnot so we don't get scurvy. Um, we of course have hundreds of thousands of morphological similarities, and so what we see is that
I don't
we
know
see
about
our
hundreds of
genetics.
thousands, but okay. We're probably
Well,
getting up to some really small levels if we start making that. But okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
the I mean, we're both, what is it? Gillis, organic RNA, DNA, protein-based, metabolic, metazoic, nucleic, diploid, episticont, deuterostome, collimate, spinal cord, etc. All that jazz. We share.
Impressive. Well
We
done.
share.
Well done.
Thank you. I was quoting from someone else, but I guess I can link in the description below to that video. But
Whatever.
but the point is we share all these characteristics.
Make your audience figure it out.
The point is we share all these characteristics with chimps. We share all this DNA with chimps. We share all these morphological characteristics with chimps. I mean, it's not just sort of vague. Our similarities with chimps are not vague. They're very well defined. We know a whole lot about our similarities with them. Our anatomy is very similar, physiology, our genes, and even our and then you look at the fossils, and you look at the fossils like Sahelanthropus and Oran and Ardipithecus. Don't worry, I talked about all those and pointing to common ancestry.
Sure.
But we find those that have similarities with both chimps and our ancestry about the time that we split from our common ancestry with chimps. We find them around that point.
And this is where worldview comes in. We're making, if I could jump in and cut you off, is that okay? Is that all right?
Sure. I was just going to say that these fossils corroborate the genes and the morphology.
Okay. But that timeline that you have is making an old Earth assumption. An assumption that not saying it's groundless, but that that you're forcing onto the data. Not forcing, but that you're placing onto the data and then trying to make sense of the data through an old Earth way of viewing the world. Also, Now, from my worldview perspective, I mean, yes, chimps and humans are very similar, and my question is, why would they be different? They use their hands as well. They have generally large brains, forward eyes. They're omnivorous. We have pretty close diets and in the same things that we eat. So why would the creator of all things, assuming he exists, make us to be so much radically different from the chimpanzee?
But we're not radically different.
Exactly. And there's no reason for him to make us to be radically different.
I mean, there's no reason why he should make more than one species at all. Given if we're assuming
except that he likes living things.
Okay, but I mean, you can make billions of.
And this is much more deeper worldview talking, but
I'm just saying theoretically, if this hypothesis that it was all designed doesn't really seem to hold up if there's no mechanism. It's like, well, why do we have some similarities with chimps but not others? Why do we have some similarities with gorillas, orangutans? Why do we share some similarities with lungfish, for instance, or even bacteria? Why do we share some characteristics but not all? And then if you compare...
this is easily explainable if you have a creator who simply writes the code and says, I think this section of code would do really well in this organism. I'll copy it over. But that makes total sense if there is a genetic code programmer, if you will.
Well, it actually creates more questions than it solves, because you have to ask yourself, what is the reason?
The question isn't to eliminate questions; it's to explain the data that we have.
Well, in science, you want an answer that... Well, in science, what you want is a parsimonious answer. You want an answer... I'm not saying it's the simplest answer is the best, but what I'm saying is you want an answer that doesn't have to necessarily or to unnecessarily multiply assumptions about the world so that we can figure out what is most likely the answer. You want the answer that generally has the fewest assumptions about reality. And when we look at the data and we see the cross-corroboration between genetics, morphology, paleontology, as well as biogeographical and embryological evidence, as well as others, then you see this, we see this tree of life building up. But if you look at it from a design point of view, there's no reason why there should be more than just one species. Why aren't there just humans on Earth? What's the reason that millions or billions of species, many of which have died off, would be put on this Earth?
Would you like a theological answer?
I want an answer that can be tested. Because as a scientifically minded person, one who has and does work in a museum of zoology with people who directly study evolution,
okay, but
I'd like an answer that can be tested.
And I see what you're saying. I know, but again, well, not really again. Okay, I'll just say it this way. When you make a jump from one field into another, the method of testing becomes different. The scientist isn't going to answer all. Yeah, the scientist isn't going to answer all the questions of life in the laboratory. There are some things that he's going to have to go outside of his realm of experience, outside of his method, in order to test and confirm.
I mean,
when I jump from, what's that?
I mean, yes, the method of studying bacteria in a petri dish is different from the identification of rocks, of telling that this rock or this territory used to be a lake, rivers and lakes, for instance, or a floodplain, but now it's a desert. Yes, there are different ways of doing that, but what's the point?
Well, the point is that when you jump from a purely materialist view of the world and you jump to a theological view of the world, the kinds of questions you ask and the ways you solve them are going to be very different.
Okay, but
I,
for
I had that better a few minutes ago, but whatever.
For a hypothesis to be considered valid scientifically, if God exists and is the designer of life, then there should be a way to check it, to know that he is in fact the designer and he is designing things this way or that way. There should be a way to check that, and that should be able to be done using
Designed in
the
the
scientific
past.
method. So he's not designing anything else anymore.
I mean, it's possible that he's designing more stuff, but I don't think so.
But how would you know if he does or if he doesn't? How would you be able to distinguish design today or something that's, descended from one of the originally created animals, or it was designed yesterday? How would you
See,
be able to distinguish?
and this would be a scientific question. We would answer it scientifically.
But how could you?
Scientifically.
Okay, but
You're still asking scientific questions, so the answers are still going to be scientific. But now when you ask, if we were to ask, does God exist? We're going to have to go about proving this in a different way, which is why I'm very, very excited to talk about the historical Jesus Christ with you next time.
I'm not. Yeah, that'll be next time. Yeah, we can probably cut this off at about 2:45, I suppose, if that'd be okay with you.
Yeah, I've got about 34 minutes of battery left.
Okay, so I suppose in about 10
minutes
we can cut it off. Okay.
Sure.
So I'm just saying, let's assume there is a designer. I'm just saying, let's assume there is for the sake of argument.
Cool.
But what method could we use to test that he or she or whatever does anything in this world? What is the method? Because if you want to convince people who are...
We don't know that he does anything in the world anymore.
Well, how do we know he ever did anything in the world in the first place? How do we know it wasn't aliens who constructed our world from a program or something?
Okay, so for example, if we look at the amount of time it would take to generate a genome such as ours from the beginning of the world, and we find out that it requires something ridiculous like 4 times more time than is given to us for an old Earth to exist, then we'll know that something else put us here.
Well, I mean, if that were true, that would... Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, my mic was kind of weird for a second there. I was saying, well, yes, if that were true, then we'd have reason to look in that direction, but that's not the case.
Okay, and let me give you another one. If it were the case that there is no scenario which we can put together where abiogenesis occurs, that would be very strong evidence that an outside agent put life here.
Yes, it would be, yes, that life couldn't naturally start by itself. But again, that's not the case. We don't know enough about the origin of life yet. I mean, we know quite a bit about the origin of life. We know that it's possible to make proto-cells in the lab, which have rudimentary metabolisms. We know all the parts necessary for us. Again,
actually,
we're not
what that proves is that you can fabricate proto-cells in the lab. That doesn't prove that you can start proto-cells.
No.
But okay. You're right. I got you. I feel you.
Yeah, I mean, it's what he's saying is these natural materials can come together to create these proto-cells, which aren't technically alive, but show signs of what we consider life. But,
okay, and we can argue about that later.
Well, I mean, you can't really argue with the results of their experiments. I don't really know how you'd argue that. I mean, it's out there on the internet.
By arguing the method. If it took a lot of intelligence to formulate to form an environment contrary to the one that either exists today or we think existed back then it's invalid. But
that's the point. They're using what we know about early Earth and what we know about basic life to build build was the only word I could think of off the top of my head. But I mean,
okay.
but to create or whatever this protocell, to make these protocells from these nucleic acids and phospholipids and what have you, proteins and carbohydrates.
Okay, and last thing I'll say is that if it is the case that one form of animal doesn't change into another form, into another kind of animal, then that would be strong indication that there's a lot of animals around that didn't come from another ancestor. It would be another strong indication that something else put them here.
Again,
so that would be 3 teleological arguments.
Again, if that were true, but we'd also have to define what a kind is. We'd have to have parameters set out, and we'd have to see what the barriers are. When do we classify something as a different kind? What classifies as one kind? We'd have to do a lot more
Such
research.
As from the genetic code, right? Where we have a minimum number for an animal to stay alive. What did you call it? Fidelity? Something?
Oh, copying fidelity?
Yeah, copying fidelity.
But I mean,
for an animal to remain alive and such.
I would imagine that there are some things that can't happen in any organism, or in any animal, I should say, let's make it like in any mammal, okay? Let's say in any mammal, you can't be born without a brain.
Sure.
Or a stomach or lungs or something like that. There are mutations that can't happen, but that applies to all mammals, probably to all reptiles and amphibians too. But yeah,
any animal. And what I would argue is that the minimum number of amount of copying fidelity is actually much greater for that animal to remain alive than you think.
I'd have to see some proof of that.
Sure you would. And again, this is not my field of expertise. But you see, if even one of those 3 arguments, that animals don't come from other animals, that life doesn't spontaneously generate, or that it takes a much longer time for animals to come from other animals, assuming that they do, than the time that is given to us. If any one of these is true, it would be a very, very strong indication that my worldview is correct. Again, and that there is a creator.
Yes, but I would say you'd have to find evidence for that to be true first.
True. But I didn't go into biology. I went into history.
Okay, fair enough. But I mean, I've done a lot of research on the concept of kinds, and I have not found any satisfactory definitions yet, or at least maybe not even satisfactory is the word I'm looking for. Perhaps consistent definitions is the word I think we could use.
Nor do I think you're going to, because everyone who's this is why the ID movement is probably so small, I imagine, because everyone who believes in God just wants to know more about him, and so they go into things like theology, sociology, the humanities, whereas people going into science have a specific worldview that God doesn't exist, and so science is the way to create a better world. What's that?
That's not true. That's not true at all. Francis Collins, Robert Bacher, Mary Schweitzer, all biologists or paleontologists who believe in God. All fantastic scientists too.
Okay, cool.
I mean, Francis Collins. I used a quote from Francis Collins in my Pointing to Common Ancestry video.
Nice.
He's a fantastic scientist. Okay,
but is this the majority of? Is this the majority of scientists, or?
Well, whether or not
I mean, to list 15 doesn't matter if there's 1,000.
I agree, but the point isn't. The point isn't whether or not God exists. That is irrelevant to whether or not evolution happens.
True.
And you would get that from any person, I think, any scientist, whether or not they believe in God. Yeah, the issue isn't so much does evolution happen, because if you talk to the people who are directly studying evolution, they will tell you without a doubt it happens. I actually work with them. It's it's very intriguing research. There's actually a whole lot more technical data on evolution than a lot of people think exists. There are mountains of papers, and I would just encourage people to look them up. They're amazing. Go to NC.
In the same way, I would encourage people to look and apply their reason to the evidences for Jesus Christ.
Okay, well, I mean, that's something we can talk about the next time we converse. So, but anyways, it's about time. We've done this for about an hour and a half or so, or not, hour 45 minutes, I guess. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for having this conversation with me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having it with me.
Hey, no problem. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Good times.
All right.
Good times.
Well, thank you very much. I'll talk to you later.
Yep. Peace.